Breath of the Wild turned what we expect from a Zelda game on its head, foregoing established conventions and reimagining what a 3D Zelda is. And while it's one of my favourite games of all time, it is lacking in some regards. There's little enemy variety, the story isn't particularly interactive, and finding secrets in the game's beautifully designed overworld rarely rewards the player with anything more than another shrine or Korok seed. But later this year, we'll learn more about Breath of the Wild's sequel, a game which currently we know almost nothing about, save for the fact that it'll build on the foundations built by the original. We know that, in parts, it'll reuse Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, and of course it'll almost definitely feature most of the same mechanics too. One of the areas I felt Breath of the Wild fell a little bit short in comparison to other 3D Zelda games was its items. Outside of the plethora of weapons, armors and materials, the game really doesn't have too many of what I'd consider traditional Zelda items, mainly because the Sheikah Slate acts as a multi-tool. But with the sequel on the horizon, I thought, why not run through some potential items I'd have loved to see in Breath of the Wild and hope to see in some form in the sequel. The Zelda team has toyed with the idea of the paraglider for years, giving us the Deku Leaf in the Wind Waker, which Link can use to ride winds across large gaps, and the Sailcloth in Skyward Sword, which isn't used as much more than a parachute. In fact, during development of Breath of the Wild, the Sailcloth was actually originally planned to appear, until it was replaced with the paraglider. In terms of how much it affects how you play the game as a whole, few Zelda items are as important to their respective games as the paraglider is. It allows Link to break his fall, to traverse huge distances, and even has niche uses in combat. The item is given to Link at the start of the game by King Rome, after he reveals his true identity upon completion of the Great Plateau's shrines, and it's still among Link's most important equipment at the very end of the game too. If the paraglider returns in the sequel, then I'd love to see some different variants. Concept art for Breath of the Wild shows designs for a paraglider with streamers to show wind direction, and even a bizarre giant cuckoo laden with packs. Age of Calamity actually features alternate paraglider designs for each character, like a Sheikah parachute for Impa or flying Koroks for Hestu. Considering how much we used the paraglider in Breath of the Wild, I'd love to see some alternate designs. Perhaps even gliders with different attributes, such as a slower glider that allows Link more control over his flight, or an incredibly fast glider with propellers that loses altitude quickly due to the extra weight. Apart from Breath of the Wild, my absolute favourite 3D Zelda game is The Wind Waker, so it's safe to say that, in my opinion, Breath of the Wild's sailing left a little to be desired. Cutting down a tree and finding a Korok leaf to propel a small raft across a freezing river is great. It's an example of Breath of the Wild at its best, but on the other hand, sailing that same raft across an expanse of open ocean by using the same Korok leaf to fan the sail just feels tedious. It feels like once Link is out on open waters, the sail should, well, work as sails do and move the craft with the wind. Even if the sequel's oceans aren't developed much further than this, which I hope they are, I'd love to see something which addresses this issue and makes travelling the seas feel a little less gimmicky. Giving Link a sail item, which can be temporarily installed on rafts to allow them to sail without the use of a Korok leaf, would be a very simple way to solve this problem, and could be a way to allow Link to travel further into Hyrule's surrounding oceans, to explore deeper waters and forgotten islands. Breath of the Wild has a huge amount of cookable materials. Monster guts, salt, mushrooms, eggs, rice, fish, insects, even what's most likely the concentrated energy of Calamity Ganon itself, all can be stewed together to create food or elixirs to buff Link's attributes or overall health. As a general rule, the better the ingredients, the better the resulting dish will be, but how they're combined is the most important factor. There's a huge amount of unique recipes in this game that I've never even bothered to try cooking. Mushroom risotto, sautéed nuts, stuffed pumpkins, honeyed apples, just by throwing together a few ingredients in a cooking pot. It's a wonderful system, however, I've always felt that it's let down a bit by its UI. To cook, you just hold the items you want to combine and then dump them together in a pot. Which is fine, but say you take a chance and combine a bird drumstick, Hylian rice, an egg and some butter, and manage to cook up a poultry pilaf. That's great, but unless you write this down or use the internet, there's no way to store this recipe. Just like when you discover a recipe for the princess's favourite meal, fruitcake, this information isn't stored unless you write it down or remember it. To remedy this, I'd love to see a cookbook, perhaps collected a small way through the story, which logs the meals you've cooked, the ingredients used, method to cook, and the effect that the resulting dish has. The game's cooking system even has completely overlooked mechanics, like how cooking during a blood moon will yield increased effects, which could be noted down in this cookbook. Breath of the Wild's cooking system is incredibly innovative, and if they build on it in the sequel, I'd love to have a way to store and remember recipes. Above everything else, the two most common complaints about Breath of the Wild are the durability of its weapons and the rain. The ability to climb almost anything, from trees to ruins to mountains, is a huge part of what makes Hyrule so fun to explore, what makes it feel so open and so connected. You are Link, a legendary hero reborn after a century into a broken kingdom, determined to shatter evil's chokehold on your homeland and destroy the calamity, unless there's a drizzle. The idea behind the mechanic makes sense. You need to adapt to the weather and change your playstyle accordingly. But more often than not, when it's raining, most players will just end up waiting it out, because there's no other way to scale whatever it is they're climbing. This is a limitation which makes sense at the beginning of the game, where Link is at his least powerful, but it's still a problem towards the end. Even with max stamina, sometimes you'll have to put down your controller and wait out the rain in order to climb something. I'd personally love to see this mitigated in some way, perhaps with the inclusion of a dedicated item. The grip ring, for example, was featured in the Minish Cap, and allows Link to climb sheer cliffs and scale Mount Krenal. A similar item could be used in Breath of the Wild's sequel to allow him to climb without slipping in the rain, perhaps at the cost of taking some damage or burning extra stamina to do so. The game's horses are a series first in that they must be found and tamed in the wilds, rather than being already trained. They roam the open fields in groups, and Link must sneak close to mount and then tame the animal. Horses are a fast, efficient way to travel. They'll automatically follow paths and avoid obstacles, and can be stored and summoned from any of the game's many stables. But horses aren't the only creatures Link can ride. Bears, deer, skeletal horses, even the mysterious Lord of the Mountain can all be mounted and rode around Hyrule. While this is really cool, it's not practical at all. These mounts can't be stored at a stable like regular horses, and bears and other wildlife can't be properly controlled. I'd love to see Breath of the Wild's mount system expanded upon in the sequel. We can see from the teaser trailer that Link and Zelda travel accompanied by a huge pack animal, which the princess is seen riding, so it's possible that horses won't be the only proper mounts in the game. But expanding on this, I'd love to see an item which allows Link to tame mounts such as bears and elk, perhaps a specialised saddle used to tame the beasts of the wild. In every other 3D Zelda, with the exception of the Wind Waker, Link obtains an item which allows him to breathe underwater and explore the world's depths. Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess featured the Zora tunic, Majora's Mask went one step further with the Zora mask, and Skyward Sword, which of course predates the Zora, featured instead the Water Dragon Scale, which allows Link to freely swim underwater. Breath of the Wild of course features the Zora set, but its effects are a little different. The tunic allows Link to turn off gravity and swim up waterfalls, the legs increase swimming speed, and the helm allows him to perform a spin attack, not unlike that of Zora Link or Link with the Water Dragon Scale. But none of the pieces allow Link to swim underwater. All of Hyrule's deep bodies of water, the lakes, rivers, and seas, are only surface deep. This is a pretty obvious change to make with the sequel, and it's something I'd honestly be a little disappointed if we didn't see. I've mentioned it before, but Lake Hylia is one of my absolute favourite Zelda locations. Tranquil and calm, but hiding a secret in its depths. Breath of the Wild's Lake Hylia falls short in my opinion, almost entirely due to the fact that we can't explore the depths of the lake itself. Because of this, I'd love to see an item like the Zora Scale make a return, to give Link the ability to swim underwater. Aside from his sword and shield, few of Link's items are as iconic as the hookshot. A handheld mechanism designed to fire a chain at a target, the hookshot can be used to pull Link towards an object, pull an object towards Link, or even stun enemies in combat. In various different forms, the hookshot has appeared in every main series 3D Zelda game, with the notable exception of Breath of the Wild. This was deliberate. Both series producer Eiji Aonuma and Breath of the Wild's director Hidemaru Fujibayashi have noted that while including the item in Breath of the Wild resulted in some incredible movement, making Link feel like Spider-Man, it was so effective that it rendered the climbing mechanic completely obsolete. Many staff members, even apparently some high-level staff, were desperate for the hookshot's inclusion, but this idea was shut down personally by Fujibayashi. His stance on the item makes sense. Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is in itself a giant puzzle. A huge part of the game is figuring out where you want to go and how you'll get there. What paths you need to take, which hills you have to climb, which enemies to be wary of. Breath of the Wild's Link is already the most mobile iteration of the character in the series, and adding the hookshot, in combination with the climbing and paragliding, could well trivialise a massive part of what makes the game work. But if, like Aonuma states, the hookshot was awarded to the player towards the end of the game, when most of the world had been explored, its challenges conquered and secrets uncovered, then I'd have absolutely loved to see how a hookshot would work in Breath of the Wild's world. I don't know about you, but I'd have much preferred to unlock the hookshot after the Champion's Ballad rather than the Master Cycle Zero, another item which makes traversing the world easier. Considering the stance of people like Fujibayashi on including the hookshot in Breath of the Wild, I don't expect to see it appear in its sequel, but I'd absolutely love if it was included as a late game item, or even a post-game bonus. Perhaps the sequel could include some areas where Link's climbing and paragliding isn't as useful, like deep, bottomless caves below Hyrule, where the hookshot is essential to travel safely. I'd love to see it included, but it's a long shot. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you all so much for 500,000 subscribers. That number really doesn't seem real. If you like this video, leave a like or subscribe if you haven't already for more Zelda content. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.